that we can get started. Okay, it started recording. So thank you all again for joining us. This is our Wednesday Act at Home that we're doing and talk about all things gardening. And we have a couple people on that are able to answer questions. And if you have any questions, please.
Cassie.
Oh, can everybody hear me?
I can hear you.
Yeah,
okay.
I can hear you, Katie.
Okay. Great. Yeah, so this is just a conversation, chat about gardening. I know I have a lot of questions, so if you have any, Phyllis, I know you have answers and tips that you want to share. So I don't know. I muted you just a second ago, so if you could unmute yourself. I don't know if you just want to introduce yourself. My name is Katie, by the way. I'm the volunteer coordinator with the chapter. Yeah, go ahead, Phyllis.
There. Now you hear me? Yes? But I don't hear you. Okay, that's fine. Yeah, so I've been a gardener for many, many years and have used to actually run a food pantry garden called Fitchburg Fields. Get rid of that thing. And so I wonder if anybody here is interested in knowing how to raise seedlings under lights. Because if you are, you are.
Yes, okay. Because I started some little seeds yesterday that my mom mailed to me. So I am very interested in learning about that.
Okay, well, really, you should have a light setup. I don't think they're going to do very well on that chair. I'm sorry to tell you that. But you get these like 4-foot long fluorescent bulbs in a hanger, and you can get that at any hardware store or home improvement store. And my husband made me, it's sort of like a bookshelf with holes and then hooks, and then chains come up from those lights, and you hook them onto the hooks, like cup hooks, you know. And the reason you want chains is because you want to be able to change the level of the lights, because this is the most important thing, is that the lights have to be 1 inch above the plants. Okay, that's how most people go wrong, and they say they were so leggy, and that is for sure true. If they're not getting light right there, they're going to be reaching for the light and get really leggy. And even though these seem like very bright lights, but they're nothing compared to the sun. And so that's why you have to have them just 1 inch, and then as they grow bigger, you keep on raising up the lights. And you, I always give them 12 hours of light. Sometimes some people say give them more, like 14, but because I have a setup that can give light to 4 trays at once, I have 8 trays. And so 4 of them I stick on top when they're not being lit, and then at the 12th hour I switch them all. And the ones that were on top get under the lights, and the other ones go up there. So yeah, I know it's harder right now. Maybe you don't want to go to a store, but this is probably something you could have shipped to you. However, if you're going to do that, you would want to do it right away, because most of them say plant 4 to 6 weeks before the last spring frost. And for us, that's May 10th. So April 10th will be around 4 weeks.
Okay.
So if you can't do that, then you could. If you can't do that, you might look into buying seedlings from people or stores that sell them. And I will sell, I don't have a whole lot, but I will have some seedlings, and not a store, but you know, we could make arrangements to sort of meet at the driveway.
Oh, that would be cool. And I know, at least I live near to an Ace Hardware, and they're doing deliveries or curbside pickups. So there are some, I know hardware stores are staying open, and so those are definitely accessible to people. Yeah, that's so cool. I'm definitely a beginner in terms of food plants. I have a ton of other plants behind me, but food plants are very new. Yeah, anybody else have any questions, or Phyllis, anything else you'd like to talk about? Feel free to
let's hear what other people ask first.
Well, I just want to chime in and say thank you for that tip, Phyllis. I started seedlings about 2 weeks ago, and I have lights, but they were not 1 inch above. And I was going to ask you why my dill is really long and scrawny and falling over, and it's because the lights were too far away. So Thank you for intuitively knowing what my problem might be.
Oh, and there's another thing. When they're outside, they get blown by the wind, and that makes them stronger. Just like people exercise, they get stronger. So do plants. But if they're inside, there's no wind, they could be very weak. So what you want to do is blow on them every day. Or later you can just run your hand across them gently, and that makes them bend and stand up. And then they get stronger that way.
That is really cool. I never knew that. Phyllis, I was wondering, are there specific plants that are better suited for container planting for those that maybe don't have a yard and things like that?
Right. Well, tomatoes you can plant in a 5-gallon bucket. I think they're 5-gallon. They're those pretty tall, big ones. And of course, you have to put holes in the bottom. So you can drill holes in a plastic bucket like that. Or you might find just a giant flower pot, but it has to be quite big. And I even have seen that there's special tomatoes that they breed to go in there, but you could also try anything. Things with shallow roots, of course, is what you want. So you could definitely do all kinds of greens like lettuce and Asian greens, like tatsoi is a tasty Asian green that's not very it's not very hot, and spinach, and I've seen people growing string beans, and of course you could do peas, and my peas are already up, but I think if depending on how hot it gets, how quickly, you could still maybe have a good shot with snow peas or snap peas, the edible pod kind, because they are ones that they say sow as early as the ground can be worked in the spring. So I think carrots would probably do okay. I mean, you know how long a carrot is, so your container would have to be at least that long. And the big thing with containers and with any garden is don't crowd them too much. You have to think about how big will they be when they are all grown up. Not how many babies can you fit together, because then they don't have.
I like that piece of advice. That's one of the biggest mistakes I see people make is they've got 3 tomato plants in a square foot.
Yeah, that won't work. And like a kale plant, that could have its a square foot, I would think, at least for a kale plant. But you can get so much out of kale. Yeah, and then let's just look at. I think squash is pretty shallow roots, so you could do squash, and if it's a container, then you had better put a trellis for it, because otherwise it's just going to cover so much area. I mean, I guess I never did this, but I guess it would be okay if the squash plant came out and then just draped along the ground. It doesn't keep on putting out new roots. It's just got the roots at the base. So there's winter squash, and there's many kinds of summer squash you could do. Yeah. And also, one thing I want to say is read the seed packets. They have a lot of information on them. How deep to sow them. And that's really important. If it's supposed to be a 1/4 inch and you put a whole inch on top, maybe it'll have a real hard time getting out of the ground. And how far apart, and whether it should be direct seeded, that means right into the garden, or planted inside and then transplanted. But as I say, you have to have lights for that. And then just other things about how to harvest and when to harvest. And you might notice it'll tell you how many days to maturity. Sometimes that's from date of transplant, sometimes it's from date of direct seeding. And so you can count that out. And if you see, if I put them in now, they won't be ready until October. Well, you probably missed your window there, because it's a shame to use up all that space for something that's not going to mature. Oh, I know. Anybody who is doing underlight seedlings too, the Solanaceae family, the peppers, the eggplants, and the tomatoes, they really like heat. So you can buy a heating pad that goes under 1 or 2 flats, and I think it's 80 degrees, and And then you get a plastic lid that goes over the flat too, because otherwise if you're heating it, the ground will dry out too soon. So it's like a little terrarium. And you can use that heating pad. And also if you don't have one, and they cost about $25, you can put it on top of your refrigerator, which is probably not as good, but it is probably the warmest place in your house. So that's what I have, one up there and one on a heating pad. And then I did another one, and they have actually a heating pad for sale at the Home Depot, but I'm not willing to go in that store, and they won't ship it to me. So I just took our medical heating pad and put it under half of one of mine.
I missed the beginning of the conversation because I couldn't get my audio going, but I've been in for a couple minutes now. And I'm going to try to point my camera in the right direction.
Yeah, I see it.
So that's a little tomato seedling. It was seeded on March 14th.
Cool.
It's doing really well. It's got lights above them about 2 inches or less above the top of the plant. So if like Phyllis said, if I didn't have the sunlight bulbs right above them, this plant would probably be another inch or two tall, and its stem would be much, much more thin. So
yeah,
this one's doing pretty good. And then here's some little purple basils that were seeded on the same day. So you can tell they're not trying to go real tall to reach for light. Because when I have them in the basement in my little greenhouse, they have a light very, very close to them.
That reminds me about tomatoes. So if you buy or raise the tomatoes, when you plant them, you want to plant them deep, because you might have noticed all those little hairs on the stem of a tomato. Those will all become roots if you put them in the ground. So that's one reason it'll start making lots more roots. It'll be a much stronger plant. And also, yep, see how furry it looks? And also, when you plant them, which will probably be around the 1st of June is when I do that, because transplant them, because you can get, cold snaps happening before that. It can be windy. And I have seen it where people plant the tomatoes and then they get broken off by the wind. And what a shame that is. But if you have it, you can plant them up to the first true leaves. So the first two leaves are called cotyledons.
And watch
they're
this.
not
Let's get
true
rid of
leaves.
those right now, Phyllis.
Yep, you can just snip them off. But you can plant them up to their neck, so to speak, up to the first true leaves, and then they'll be stronger.
And even in this little pot, this has sterile seed starting mix in it. So in another maybe 2 weeks or so, I'll be potting this up, and I'll be putting it in a potting mix that has more food in it for this plant. So even then, when I pot it up, the pot won't be much bigger. It'll be just a little bit bigger. But then I'll take this little seedling and I'll pot it all the way up to here. So I'll have to have a pot deep enough to hold all my roots and the stem.
Yeah. And also remember, when you're transplanting anything, you try not to touch the roots or the stem, because like you have oils on your fingers, and then that can put the oils on the stem, and then that helps the pathogens get in. So what you do is like you turn it over and, oh, can you see me? I need to see
like
me.
this.
Yeah, you let the leaves go through your fingers and turn it over and maybe tap it and hit it with a stick or something, loosen it, and then put it into the hole, or in this case, your case, a larger pot. And when they're quite small, you can pick seedlings up by a leaf. You don't want to do that. You think that's bad, it'll rip the leaf. And if it's a big enough seedling, it will. But if it's small enough, you can do that, and that's way better than touching the roots or the stem.
What about sometimes when you buy things potted, the roots are all clumped up in the pot, and I'd heard you're supposed to try to separate them gently?
Yeah, that's right. You just take your fingers and just, I'm not even that gentle, just kind of break them apart. If they're wound around, then yeah, try and not break those, but just get them out. So it's like combing out the hair, so that they're all freestanding, because just like with a tree, if you plant a tree where the roots are going around, they will not undo. They will just keep going around, and eventually the tree will probably die. So you break up any mat at the bottom of interwoven roots and kind of stretch them out and then put them in the garden. And I've seen, they say, like, if you have a big tomato plant like that, make your hole and then make a little like pyramid of dirt in there so that the roots will go down around the pyramid and it's sticking up in the middle of where the roots are, if you get that.
Hey, Phyllis, I had a couple things. First of all, I was curious, does it help to name the plants and talk to them?
Yes, it does. I've actually never named them, but yes, there's all kinds of experiments that have been done that show that the plants that are talked to do better.
Yeah. Actually, what I was wondering, though, on the lighting, you mentioned fluorescent lighting. Does color spectrum matter on that? What about putting stuff in a south-facing window or somewhere if you have a pretty good lighting? Or what about LED bulbs? Are there any made that might be suitable?
Yeah, you're right. There are grow lights now.
Yeah, I can speak to that also.
Do. Go ahead.
Yeah, so you do want grow lights. They're sometimes sold as sunlight bulbs or grow lights. And like I think Phyllis was talking about earlier, how you want to have them within about an inch or two of the top of your seedlings. A south-facing window, you're going to get really long, leggy plants, and their stems are not going to be very strong at all. And that's when you run into the situation where once you get them outside and either a wind will come along and knock them over and break them, or as they continue to grow taller, that stem will never have become strong enough and the plant will get top heavy, and then you will maybe end up with a broken plant. So yeah, so like I have fluorescent fixtures, 3-foot fluorescent fixtures in my basement. So I bought special bulbs called sunlight bulbs. Some people are even so, I don't know what the word I want is, but so adamant about this that they will buy new lights every year because they say the lights aren't good after that many hours. So they're expensive. I don't do that because the bulbs are too expensive.
Yeah. And I remember reading and I think doing, each fixture holds 2 bulbs, and they say put one cool light and one warm light.
Yeah,
and
done that also.
It's labeled there, so I don't know exactly what that means, but and I have seen that when a plant grows up and touches a light, it's not bad for it. It doesn't burn it like you might think. So you get into this problem where some are growing taller than the others. And I use shims. I have pieces of wood. So if at one end they're all short, I shim that up and the other end is down.
Yeah, I have 3 separate fixtures down in a little greenhouse in my basement. So then I have them kind of on adjustable chains. So some taller plants will be under one light so that I can lower it or raise it to whatever height those plants are at. And then the other shelf will have shorter plants on so that that light can be down near the top of them.
Oh, another thing you can do. So because I have raised, one year we raised 1,500 seedlings. I had 2 interns to help with the repotting. That was a job. And I only have room for 8 at a time. So they have to go outside pretty soon. As soon as they need to be separated, I repot them and put them outside, but you can't just put them outside. I have mini hoop houses, and there's different ways you can do this. Mine are made of this well, it's called rebar, but there's 2 kinds of rebar. It's not that kind that's like a very thick piece of steel. It's more like a giant screen where the squares are about 6 inches. And you can bend it. And then we stuck housing insulation on either end. So it's like a little Quonset hut, about 3 feet by 5 feet and about 3 feet tall, or 2.5. And then over that, so I put out on a sunny day, I put out my new seedlings that are they're not ready for all, the nighttime. It gets too cold. They would be killed. But at nighttime, I put a plastic cover over them. It's pretty thick. I don't know how many mils it is, but I cut these. And then there's something called a concrete blanket, which is used for curing concrete. And it's just a synthetic blanket. And I put that over the plastic at night and hold it down with rocks or pieces of wood or sticks or something. And then in the morning, got to get out there, take off that blanket, take, what do you call them, clothespins, and pin up to air out, to give a little cool air in, but not too much. So it's something you learn. You want it warm, but not too warm, because when the sun hits that, even though it's really cold outside, if it's totally covered by plastic, they will just cook inside there. So you have to pin it up. I do it usually on both sides. And then as the day gets warmer, maybe even take it off. This is a lot of babysitting, but now that everybody's home, you have the time for babysitting.
I was going to say, I mean, all of that sounds like this is all so fascinating because I've never really known about any of this. But what would your recommendations be for like really easy plants, beginners? I might have time for babysitting, but I might not have the energy or the space to do the babysitting. What are your favorite staples, beginners, easy to do, harder to kill?
Beans.
Yeah.
Beans?
Yeah. They sprout quickly. They're nice and big and sturdy. You don't have to start them very far ahead. So like a green bush bean, a yellow bean, whatever color you want, just basic your green beans. If you were going to start them indoors, you wouldn't start them very far ahead. Again, you have to read the package to see what your time frame is. They're also really easy to just start directly in your garden. So, but that would be my recommendation. They're good growers.
Yes, I agree. And I don't start them indoors ever. Just direct seed and follow the instructions. Some of them, I would not get bush beans because that's back breaking. I always get pole beans and put up poles and trellises, teepees, whatever. And yeah, and there's all different ways you can make trellises. So beans are some, peas are others. Like I said, peas, you better hurry up. There's a squash. That's easy, though you will get squash bugs, and I can talk about that. Cucumbers, and you don't have to have trellises, but it's better if you have trellises. You certainly fit more into your garden if you have trellises. Spinach. You can do melons. I'm trying melons again this year. I've never had luck with them. They need a lot of heat. So I just try them. Lettuce.
Melons get powdery mildew every year, and then everything dies. So.
Beets are good, and radishes. Also potatoes. Onions. Now I'm starting onions from seed, and I started them kind of late, but you can buy onion sets, they're called, which are just tiny little onion plants. Some of them actually have the green shoot on them, but more often they're just dry, like you might see in a store when you're buying shallots or something. They look like that, and you just plant them in the ground. And April is the best time for that. I've found that after April, they come to nothing. I mean, they're very small. But in the Fitchburg Fields garden, we planted them in April, and we had great big onions. That was awesome. Also, what's easy? Kale is easy. Cabbage, I haven't had very much luck with, but I'm trying again. I think it needs certain things in the soil maybe my soil doesn't have. Also peppers and tomatoes if you're buying them. They're generally pretty easy. Now, really important thing is mulch. For one thing, mulch keeps the moisture in the ground when it's not raining very much, and so that cuts down on how much you have to water. But also super important with tomatoes, because tomatoes have so many diseases, right? And they get wilts and I can't even say that V one, but and blights. But those diseases are in the ground. So you need to have all your mulch ready before you dig the holes and transplant the tomatoes, and then immediately mulch around them. Because when it rains, the drops splash the dirt up onto the bottom of the leaves, and then they start getting a disease. Now, my tomatoes always get a disease by the end of the season, but they keep on producing. Maybe not as much, but they keep on producing. But I really slow down the disease, flatten the curve, so to speak, with with having lots of mulch. What kind of mulch, says Jacinda? Yes. Well, in my yard, I have a very tall grass area, and I just rake up the dead grass in the spring, and that's my mulch. But you could use leaves, and some people use compost, though I would still put something on top of that. You can buy straw. I'm really nervous about buying anything now from somewhere else because of the what are they called, jumping worms?
Mhm.
Yeah, and they are just terrible. If you
Yeah,
see,
they're on the move really fast too. So
yeah, if you see worms that are thrashing around for no good reason. Now, a regular worm, you dig them up and you might hurt them and something, they're going to thrash around. But the jumping worms, they thrash a tremendous amount for no good reason. If you find that in something that you had imported, I mean, try and just throw it all away, put it in bags and get rid of it. Maybe you could stop the invasion of your property.
for mulch, I use grass clippings also because I know I don't have any fertilizer or anything on my grass, and we have a large lawn, so I'll throw a bag on the mower just for that and collect grass to mulch around certain plants.
And with things that love the heat, like tomatoes and peppers and eggplants, some people actually do black plastic. They just, I guess, make a hole in it for the plant and put it over it. And then that heats up the ground, and it's also a mulch. We're reading the notes. That's why we smile like that. Go ahead, Pam.
Okay. When I was still renting out of college, I started putzing around the yard there at a flat that I was renting and just started being interested in what was growing there and why. And then a neighbor was doing some gardening, so they would give me some plants, and that was the fabled "don't take free plants from neighbors" because I think they gave me snow on the mountain, which is a very invasive plant. But that's where I got started. And then when I owned my first home, there was already a little tiny vegetable garden plot staked out there and kind of had rabbit fencing around it, a small urban lot. And so then that was ready to go, and I was ready to go and start experimenting with vegetables. And then I had some good luck there, and it was really fun.
Yeah, and I started flower gardening when I was about 12. And sometime later, when I had a house, yeah, I got into planting food crops. And I don't even remember who I got advice from, but reading books and I do remember someone, when she was reassuring us about planting, she says, the things want to grow, right? You give them dirt and water and light, and they're going to grow. So don't feel like, oh, I couldn't possibly do this. They're going to help you.
Another little fun piece of my learning to garden is that when I was renting still on the east side of Milwaukee, that's when Dennis Grzinski and his wife Jane were my neighbors. And so that was fun because they had a totally natural yard. And I would be looking at plants going, I'm going to rip this out or I'm going to do that. And Dennis or Jane would say, no, 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 that's good. Here's what that is. And you want to keep that. So they were a little bit of an influence there too, because they had tons of native flowers and native plants in their yard.
Oh yeah, that's so important. A lot of people plant a row of native flowers, or maybe they just have them at the edge of the garden, and they can attract native pollinators. And so, of course, a lot of your fruits and vegetables need pollination from insects. And so you don't want to have this totally sterile place. They need food. And they need food all the time, right? So they can't just wait for your squash, say, to come online if that's what they like. They need something before it flowers. Let me talk a bit about squash bugs because they are terrible. You should be inspecting your squash leaves on the bottom of them. Just turn them over and you'll see either eggs, which are beautiful, jewel-like orange deposits, and you just take your thumb and smush them, okay? Kill them. But if you don't catch them in time, then you'll see little gray nymphs and then later crawling gray bugs. And you can squash the nymphs pretty well, but the bugs I would put, have a jar of soapy water, detergent water, and just knock them into there and drown them.
So
Yeah.
as a side note to that, if you fall in love with gardening, you'll cure your fear of insects. You will be out there attacking them.
Yeah, same thing with the Japanese beetles. And I was going to say, I would plant, if you can plant where you are, raspberries, because that's a wonderful fruit, and they spread a lot. So you starting with just a one or two, you could have a nice patch after a while. And the Japanese beetles love them, and so with them you have to really sneak up on them because what they do when your hand comes towards them, they drop. That's their defense. So you have to come up with that jar of soapy water underneath and then threaten them above and they drop into the soapy water.
Yeah, this has all been so great. Thank you guys. I'm sure we could keep talking for ages and ages and ages about anything and everything to do with gardening. And I know I am very inspired and want to go do some stuff and maybe get a delivery from Ace. And Phyllis, I might take you up on getting some seedlings in a couple weeks or whenever those are ready. I'm sure we can figure something out. But does anybody else have any last pressing questions that they really want to have answered?
I want to say one more thing. If you want an orchard, but you're in a very small place, they have what are called columnar apple trees. And it's just like a column. The branches are maybe 4 or 5 inches long, sticking out all over, and they can have a lot of apples on them. And so they take up very little room. You do have to plant them in the ground, not a pot. But yeah, I've seen them. They're great.
This is awesome. I've learned a lot from you guys. Thanks so much.
You're welcome.
Yeah, thank you guys. I'm going to hit stop on the record. But yeah, thank you so much.
Okay, bye-bye.